Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. As Hudson's Bay looks to liquidate its business, the retailer and vendors cling to hope for a last-minute lifeline.
It comes with a heavy heart to see this go down because I expected more.
Plus,
we do have areas and school districts where there are enough unprotected children that measles could take off if it gets introduced here.
Concerns grow over BC's low vaccination rates for measles, why experts are urging you to check your vaccine status. And BC hikes up hydro rates.
This is what BC Hydro needs. We are providing this direction.
How much more you'll have to pay to power up.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Baneet Braich. Thanks for joining us. Well, it could soon be the end for Canada's oldest company, Hudson's Bay. A judge is reviewing its case to begin liquidating its stores as early as this week. And as Liam Britton reports, those with connections to the retailer here in BC are closely watching the next steps.
Founded in 1670, the Bay's story is literally one for the history books. But the question now is the centuries-old retailer history.
It makes me feel sad. I love the Hudson's Bay. I love shopping in there.
A tough consideration for shoppers.
It's certainly an iconic heritage company in Canada.
But maybe not too surprising.
Their stuff's usually a little outdated, I find.
The Bay is seeking creditor protection, looking for court permission to liquidate its 96 stores as it grapples with $950 million of debt. That debt is owed to 2,000 creditors, according to a document from a court-appointed monitor. In BC, that includes vendors, public bodies like the City of Vancouver and the province of BC, even tradespeople like elevator mechanics. Burnaby-based jeans maker Fidelity Denim is owed $15,000.
I was always really proud of the Bay to kind of like be in there.
Another company owed $15,000 is Valmart Doors. A VP says they did repairs at the Bay's Delta warehouse, but after lengthy non-payment, cut them off.
It's an old Canadian name, and you don't expect it from someone like them. And here we are.
The company has pointed to COVID pandemic impacts plus the ongoing trade war as external factors leading to financial woes. A retail expert thinks suburban mall real estate was also part of the problem.
I think it was always how to extract, for as long as possible, value out of the boxes that are 80 of them, plus the licensees peppering the country.
But many stores, like in Vancouver, are also prime downtown locations.
So the building will have another life. The question is, will that next life be a magnet, be a benefit, be an anchor, be an engine for the downtown like department stores once were?
Monday's court hearing ended without a final decision on next steps. The company is hoping to keep some of its stores out of the liquidation process if it can find financing. All the while, about 9,000 jobs hang in the balance. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Vancouver Coastal Health is reminding parents to check their children's vaccine status. This comes as measles are on the rise globally, with outbreaks in Ontario and Texas. As Michelle Gassoud reports, public health officials in BC are warning vaccination rates here are worryingly low.
Gaines County, Texas, the scene of the U.S.'s first measles-related death in a decade. The vaccination rate in this county is 82%. That number is similar to BC. Here, 82% of 2-year-olds have gotten one dose of the vaccine. Just 72% of 7-year-olds have gotten both. 95% of people need to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity.
We do have areas and school districts where there are enough unprotected children that measles could take off if it gets introduced here.
Epidemiologists warn numbers like that mean outbreaks could be possible. Vancouver Coastal Health sent this notice to parents warning of measles surging globally. Already there are ongoing outbreaks in Texas and Ontario.
I think what's particularly worrying and sort of the pattern of the outbreak we're seeing both in Texas as well as in Ontario, has been the introduction of measles into a very unimmunized community.
According to data from the BC CDC, vaccination rates for measles are particularly low in the Northeast, Thompson-Caribou Shuswap, Okanagan and Kootenay Boundary Health Service delivery areas. Many fell behind on vaccine schedules during the pandemic. Others lost trust in the medical system.
That sort of atmosphere of misinformation, around the safety and the efficacy of these vaccines is also driving some of this decline that we're seeing.
The BC CDC says BC's actual immunization rate is likely slightly higher. Many people vaccinated abroad who now live here don't have updated records in BC's system. Still, the numbers are too low.
We could not have this disease at all. Measles was eliminated in Canada in 1998 and in the US in 2000. We risk losing that status by having 12 months or more of sustained transmission.
One of the most infectious diseases on Earth, making a resurgence. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
And after a nearly 4-year-long strike, the union representing workers at the Radisson Blue Vancouver Airport Hotel says staff have ratified a new collective agreement. Unite Here Local 40 says the more than 1,400-day-long strike was the longest in Canadian history. The union says the agreement gives a pathway for 143 workers let go during the COVID-19 pandemic to go back to work, and that the new deal provides job security protections and higher wages. It's been exactly 2 years since the financial house of cards built by Victoria mortgage broker Greg Martel started collapsing. It's been called the biggest Ponzi scheme in BC history and even questioned to be the largest in Canada. Well, Karen Larson has been following this case since the beginning.
Baneet, between 2018 and 2023, Greg Martel's Ponzi scheme brought in more than $300 million, mostly from BC investors, or victims, if you will. Simply explained, Martel was selling fake investments, using money that was intended to fund fake real estate bridge loans. And paying off early investors with later investors. He lured people in with promises of sky-high interest rates. Now, the scheme collapsed, as all Ponzi's do, when people started realizing they could no longer get their money out. Fast forward to today, where over 500 Martel investors who made money in the illegal scheme are having their profits clawed back by the court, first to pay the lawyers and accountants, and the leftovers split amongst over 1,200 investors who lost everything and who will be lucky to get pennies on the dollar. Needless to say, the past 2 years have been excruciating for the victims, some of who have lost everything to the fraudster. Most have been hesitant to speak on the record, but we did find 2 victims who had this to say about their ordeal.
When we found out that it was a Ponzi, that was just devastating for so many people. It's awful. This is a crazy, awful, this is serious fraud.
I mean, it's all the stages of grief, right? Anger, resentment, denial, everything. And it's been tough. It's changed our lives a lot. Our lives look a lot different than they did.
What do we know about Greg Martel right now?
Well, his whereabouts remain unknown. He went missing in 2023 when the Ponzi started collapsing. The Victoria Police Department told me the criminal investigation is now in the hands of the BC Securities Commission. Baneet?
And that again is CBC's Karen Larson. Local governments in the Cowichan Valley say they're working to create a safer community along the Trans-Canada Highway in Duncan. Now, this comes after residents say theft, addiction, and homelessness are major issues. Well, CBC's Claire Palmer has more on the steps being taken.
Asta Devotional Indian Restaurant is located along the Trans-Canada Corridor in Duncan. Its owners say they've been broken into 3 times in recent months.
People are not safe, they will not feel safe, especially after 7 o'clock in the evening time.
The corridor links 3 jurisdictions, North Cowichan, Duncan, and Cowichan tribes. It's a place where public safety has become a concern. In a recent survey, residents identified addictions and homelessness as key issues.
We don't want to judge at all, with their appearance and everything. But for now, for our safety, we have to be need to be more secure, especially for us and for our staff.
John Horn is with the municipality of North Cowichan. He's working to help address the corridor concerns.
That does give us hope because we are able to, with a couple of interventions in terms of buildings, we could actually take a pretty good sized bite out of it. And that's not true for some communities. The problem's so large that it's going to take a long time to put a dent in it. And I think that we're a small place in a small town. That's helpful for us. We can actually make a dent in the problem. We put our mind to it.
Horn is working on building a safer community plan, which he says will help their ability to lobby the province for more funding for support. For some, there's just simply not enough resources to address the problem.
We are seeing an increase of mental health issues from depression to fairly complex mental health issues. What the concern is the lack of resources, that there is more issues than there are supports.
Horn says it's crucial to get involved early to help prevent people from becoming entrenched in the street life.
If you get in early enough, then you are just talking about an affordability issue as opposed to really complex psychiatric or addictions supports needed, right? So that's probably the biggest thing is we like to get there, and so it's an easier problem to solve.
Horn says that they have a draft of a new plan and will be shopping it to their partners in the coming weeks. Claire Palmer, CBC News, Duncan.
And BC's energy minister has made the call to increase BC hydro rates by 3.75% for the next 2 years. Adrian Dix says the increase is needed to deal with inflation, increasing demand, and tariff threats. But as Katie DeRosa reports, the opposition says the province is hiding the full scale of the rate hikes to come.
Add it to the list of things getting more expensive. BC Hydro customers are set to pay 3.75% more this year and next year to heat their homes and keep the lights on. It means the average BC household will pay just shy of $4 a month more for heat and electricity. It's the result of a directive to the BC Utilities Commission from Energy Minister Adrian Dix.
We think this is the right approach. It provides clarity, stability in the system. It lets everyone know what the rates are.
The rate increases take effect April 1st and again April 1st, 2026. Dix says the move is necessary in light of economic uncertainty due to tariff threats from the United States. He said even with the rate increase, British Columbians have among the lowest electricity rates in North America, paying almost half of what Albertans pay. And the hike stays below cumulative inflation, he said. Dix also noted that BC has had the lowest electricity rate increases in Canada over the last decade. Some in Vancouver seem unfazed by the price jump.
I'm a renter. I don't see a huge difference in that with my bills personally.
I'm lucky to be in a position to pay an extra 4%, but Site C Dam and all sorts of other investments that we need in our infrastructure network. If it's kind of for a good reason, then I personally don't have any objection.
One factor behind the rate hikes, the $16 billion Site C Dam, a project that will take taxpayers 80 years to pay off. The dam began generating power last year, with 3 power generating units operating. 3 more units are set to go online later this year. BC Conservative leader John Rustad noted BC Hydro previously said the project would result in 12% increases to hydro bills. He says the province is hiding the rate hikes coming down the pipe.
We need transparency for people in British Columbia with regards to where our electricity rates are going. So this 3.75 is a stopgap, but it certainly does not answer the questions that are out there with regards to how much our electricity is going to cost going forward.
Dix did not rule out future rate hikes. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
Well, it's March 17th. You might be wearing your green to celebrate St. Patrick's Day today. The celebrations of Irish culture and heritage kicked off in Vancouver's Gastown neighborhood. The day was originally celebrated with religious feasts in honor of Ireland's patron, St. Patrick. It has since evolved into a celebration of all things Irish. Well, Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather. Darius, it's been a nice day overall. Are we going to have more of those?
One more. We got one more. Okay. Some rain starts to move into the island tomorrow. And like you said, we had a few showers, some higher elevation flurries, but that's really it. And that's pretty much the same situation that we have tomorrow, at least until we get into the evening time. Now, if you take a look here, here we go. Nope, not going forward. Tomorrow we're going to see some rain moving in, and then we can expect to, in the evening, and then Wednesday and Thursday look a little bit more wet here in southwestern BC.
All right, thanks, Darius. We'll check back in later. And almost 2 decades after a Métis woman's remains were found in a Manitoba community, a BC man has been charged. We'll take you inside the RCMP elaborate sting, which included hockey games and... RCMP say a 71-year-old man is recovering in hospital after being shot late Saturday night in a wooded area near Highway 1 in Burnaby. Police say the victim may have been living in the area. Investigators believe it was an isolated incident, but there's no word on a possible motive. Police say the victim's injuries are serious, but he is in a stable condition. And it was an elaborate Mr. Big sting operation. It took more than 7 months and involved at least 18 RCMP officers. Undercover officers spent time getting close to the suspect in a missing and murdered Indigenous woman and girl's cold case murder. It included everything from going to Equinox games, skydiving, to staging a fake crime scene. Caroline Berg has more.
Crystal Saunders was 24 years old when her body was discovered in a water-filled ditch in St. Ambrose, Manitoba. That was April 19, 2007. The Métis woman was last seen getting into a vehicle here in Winnipeg's West End the day before. Those details and more were revealed in search warrant documents obtained by CBC News. In them, RCMP say Saunders had been strangled to death and DNA was found on her neck. At the time, police entered a sample in the National DNA database, but no matches were found. That is, until 2014. That's when Kevin Q, a Manitoba man who had been living in Vancouver, was being investigated for sexually assaulting and choking 2 women in British Columbia. The search warrant documents say there was DNA on her body from both Q and others, but RCMP believed Q was her killer. So they devised a plan for what's known as a Mr. Big operation into the MMIWG cold case. For 7 months, undercover RCMP officers befriended Q and created scenarios to try to get him to talk about Saunders' death and his potential involvement in it. Over time, it is expected that this bond will become strong and trusted enough that Kevin will discuss his past criminality, including the offense presently under investigation, wrote an RCMP corporal in a January 2024 police affidavit. Retired Winnipeg Police Detective Sergeant John O'Donovan is very familiar with Mr. Big investigations. He says investigators likely decided to launch a sting operation because they knew DNA evidence might not be enough.
It brings you up to 90%, but you need that 10% because in order to get a conviction in criminal court, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. They need some kind of a confession to nail it to the wall.
While police believed Q was Saunders' killer, it took time before they launched their undercover investigation. Q was sentenced to 5 years in prison for sexual assault and assault. Then the pandemic hit, so RCMP didn't put their plan into action until 2023. In June 2023, the undercover officers met Q at a pub he hangs out at, and they hit it off. Q invited them out on his boat the next day, and according to search warrant documents, they got very close. Over the next several months, they went on double dates together, skydiving, and Q even shared his NHL hockey tickets with his new friends. Over time, he got comfortable enough to confess he'd laundered money. In mid-December 2023, undercover officers staged what looked like something violent had happened in a hotel room. According to the search warrant documents, while having supper with the group, Kevin was laughing to himself. The undercover officer asked what he was laughing about, and Kevin said that he was thinking about how they had helped clean up what seemed like a murder. O'Donovan was impressed to read in the search warrants that Q told one of the officers that he loves him, and that's why he helps the group out.
For an undercover officer to come out and have some guy say, some murder suspect say, he's my best friend and I would do anything for him. That is like an amazing piece of work that these guys have done.
The search warrants don't say if police got a confession in the end. All we know is that Q was charged with second-degree murder in January 2024. His trial is scheduled to start in September. Caroline Bargood, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And what a beautiful day to go skiing in many parts of BC. At Cypress Mountain, the chairlifts were packed with people today. Darius will have your full province-wide forecast coming up.
I think it's important to give a human face to the stories that we hear every day, the people that they affect. And I think talking to those people is what really gives us the true sense of the impact of the stories that we're hearing.
Well, maybe you can relate to this, or maybe it will surprise you. But a new report shows that British Columbians seem to be drinking less alcohol than they have in 20 years. And Statistics Canada is showing declining alcohol sales across the country. Our medical columnist, Dr. Melissa Lem, who is with us today, joining us again. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Lem, this report out of the University of Victoria looked at pure sales in BC. So it says with one standard drink equaling different amounts of beer, hard liquor, wine, cider. And they also show that since the peak of the pandemic, these sales have dropped about 15%. What do you make of this?
I would say overall dropping alcohol sales are really great for our healthcare system. And I think it's summed up by this one recent quote from the World Health Organization, which says that any level of alcohol consumption is not safe for our health. Within Canada, we spend about $20 billion in healthcare and economic costs from alcohol. Wow. And it's actually classified internationally as a Group 1 carcinogen on the same list as tobacco, asbestos, and radiation. And this is because it increases the risk of at least 7 different kinds of cancer, including bowel cancer and breast cancer. And I have to say, this is different from what we'd heard over the years. In medical school, I learned that moderate alcohol consumption can be good for your health in some ways, particularly for cardiovascular health. But recent analysis of the evidence shows that the risks outweigh the benefits. So I think we really have to look at alcohol as something, as an indulgence, as something that we rarely consume. And Canada's guidelines say now that low-risk drinking equates to no more than 2 drinks per week, and actually no alcohol is safer than any at all.
Now, also, Statistics Canada, their report shows a similar decline. In fact, even beer sales across Canada are the lowest since 1949. That's when they started tracking it. But it also shows that cannabis consumption is going up. So do you think this is kind of like trading in one vice for another?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that we definitely have more research on the health impacts of alcohol compared to cannabis, probably because alcohol has been legal for a lot longer than cannabis. In terms of the similarities, both alcohol and cannabis can impair your judgment and response time, which if you use and drive, which is obviously not recommended, that can increase the risk of car accidents. Also, long-term use of both alcohol and cannabis can increase your risk of heart disease, and particularly in developing brains in young adults, it can permanently affect their structure and function because brains develop until you're about in your mid-20s. But if you want to look at the differences, alcohol use is increased with an increased risk of, associated with a higher risk of violence, whereas cannabis, for example, isn't. And so I would say the bottom line is that regular use of both is not considered safe.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Lem, again, for being with us today. And that, again, was looking at consumption of alcohol being in a 20-year low. And Canada's new Prime Minister is on his first international trip 3 days after taking office. Mark Carney is looking to bolster relations with Europe amid the trade war with the U.S. He began the day in Paris before heading to Britain, including a visit with King Charles.
Prime Minister of Canada, Your Majesty.
Now, the focus for the talks was security, trade, and economic ties with Europe. Carney's packed day included a meeting with the British Prime Minister. While he was in Paris, he also met with French President Emmanuel Macron. And Carney also spoke about the need to strengthen ties with what he calls Canada's reliable allies. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says that if elected, his government would cut the industrial carbon tax. He says it would make Canadian products more competitive. But experts warn the country would then have no chance of hitting Canada's emission goals. CBC's Kate McKenna has the details.
Pierre Poilievre says if he's elected, all carbon pricing is on the chopping block.
Today I am announcing that a common sense, Canada First Conservative government will repeal the entire carbon tax, including the federal backstop that requires provinces impose industrial taxes.
On Friday, Prime Minister Mark Carney said he'd kill the consumer carbon price. Now Poilievre says he'd get rid of the industrial price too.
There will be no taxes on consumers, no taxes on Canadian industries.
Most provinces have their own systems. Poilievre says they can keep them if they want. He also says he would expand eligibility for tax credits aimed at clean technology.
While the Liberals tax businesses who use energy, Conservatives will cut taxes and boost incentives for those who bring down emissions. Carrot, not stick.
But the Canadian Climate Institute says industrial carbon pricing is the biggest driver for reducing emissions.
If we got rid of the industrial carbon price today, our emissions would rise the equivalent of about 15 million cars. So yeah, we're not going to hit our targets if all the provinces and the feds get rid of it.
I would say it's bad economic policy for Canada. It's terrible environmental policy. I mean, it basically says let the big polluters pay, not pay. That they can actually pollute for free. And if you actually believe in climate change, it is important for us to actually take action. This is one of the key levers to do that.
Some business experts welcome the idea of more tax incentives.
The more predictability we have and the more incentives we have is a good thing. But of course, it's all about the details.
Poilievre says his plan would make business more competitive, but it could have long-term consequences. European countries are planning a tariff on nations that don't have carbon pricing, meaning companies could be forced to pay a carbon tax, but to a foreign government, not our own. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
And in the U.S., President Donald Trump is defending the deportation of hundreds of Venezuelans over the weekend, despite a U.S. court order barring those removals. His administration is also questioning presidential pardons granted by Joe Biden. CBC's Richard Madden has those details.
The Trump administration is denying it ignored a federal court ruling that temporarily halted the deportation of nearly 300 alleged Venezuelan gang members from the U.S. Now, this all happened late Saturday when a federal judge blocked the deportation flights to review due process. But justice officials said the planes were already in the air, adding the judge doesn't have jurisdiction over international airspace. Now, using a rare 18th century law called the Alien Enemies Act, the administration argues gives extra powers to remove unauthorized migrants with little or no due process.
This administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that, and we are wholly confident that we are going to win this case in court.
So if the judge rules the administration did break the law, the bigger question is, what can he do about it? What are the consequences? The DOJ is supposed to be independent of the executive, but is clearly under Trump's control. And this is one of several major tests for the judiciary this week alone. Trump is also pushing the courts to invalidate several of former President Joe Biden's preemptive pardons in his final days in office. Trump says Biden used an automatic signature pen to preemptively pardon those who served on the January 6th committee. Trump accuses him of not knowing what he signed. Now, Biden preemptively pardoned lawmakers who investigated Trump's role in the January 6th Capitol riots, but it also included other targets of Trump and his base, including Trump's former Joint Chief of Staff in the military and even Dr. Anthony Fauci, who criticized Trump's handling of the pandemic. Now, Biden's use of a signature pen for these pardons hasn't been verified, but the White House is pushing it anyway.
Did the president even know about these pardons? Was his legal signature used without his consent or knowledge?
All this is setting up more showdowns between the White House and the courts, further testing the limits of presidential powers and the independence of the branches of government. Richard Madden, CBC News, Washington.
How do you draw the bottom of the ocean? For researchers from New Brunswick, the answer involves a small mascot, Pingachu. We'll take you inside the boat as they try to improve our understanding of the Antarctic Ocean. When it comes to what's really happening below the ocean surface, a Canadian expedition is trying to get some answers. They're investigating the impact of freshwater glaciers melting into the sea as the continent warms. And Susan Ormiston was there to see the team from New Brunswick at work.
No one ready there, Gordon.
Correct, this bridge. You're free to launch the USVs when ready, over.
Science at sea is a heart-pumping project.
Get that hook up!
With the Navy crew trying to launch Kevin Wilcox's remote-controlled boat.
Once we get free, we'll take her back.
But our boat gets too close to the bow.
Whoa! Sorry about that. We were like getting right underneath the transom. I didn't want anybody's like head getting hit.
The unmanned surface vehicle is part of the University of New Brunswick's Ocean Mapping Group. It even has a mascot, Pingachu.
So ping like a sonar. The most important is the sonar that's underneath. And so that essentially sends a pulse of sound down to the seafloor.
100 times a minute, creating a picture of the bottom of the sea.
So we have a map over here that has data that's been collected from other groups. So I'm essentially going to be driving the USV back and forth and essentially painting in this area of the seafloor.
As the Antarctic warms and the glaciers dump more fresh water into the salty seawater, scientists want to know what happens to ocean life. This work fits into a bigger picture. Only about 25% of the world's oceans are mapped, and there's a push on to get it all done. But as you can see, it's incremental and challenging. On shore, it may not look like much, but this connects to an undersea cable, part of an observatory which reads the ocean's vitals, temperature, pressure, and salinity every day.
And so that was put in by Ocean Networks Canada in a collaboration with the Spanish for this location.
The Yellow Explorer is working away. The seabed map is starting to fill in, but suddenly, trouble.
Surprisingly, there's kelp here, which...
Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. And so that got caught up in my motors, essentially. And we've cleared that, but unfortunately, they're still not responding.
Attempts to fix it fail. So it's back to Mothership to triage the problem. And he still has to get his vehicle back on board the Margaret Brooke.
Okay, heads up in the boat.
USV is clear of the water.
Safely stored. Turns out it was just a fuse. He's relieved.
All the challenges, I'd do it all over again.
Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Espanola Cove, Antarctica.
Well, what would happen if we covered every rooftop on Earth with solar panels? Well, that's exactly what a team of scientists set out to explore. Their research found that swapping traditional energy sources for rooftop solar could actually cool the planet. CBC's Johanna Wagstaff breaks down the process and the possibilities.
What if every single roof in the world had a solar panel? Okay, so this might sound like a big and random hypothetical, but stick with me, because one group of scientists actually did find an answer. And they went looking because until now, solar panels have kind of been the underdogs of renewable energy. In the past 3 decades, we have seen huge growth in solar electricity as a renewable energy source, now supplying over 6% of global energy demand. But solar panels are not cheap to install. That, combined with skepticism about their effectiveness, has led to solar energy being underrepresented in climate models. Basically, solar panels are still pretty niche. But now we have a glimpse into what their full potential could be. Here's how scientists did it. First, the team had to calculate the total area of rooftops across the entire planet. No big deal. To do this, they actually trained AI to identify rooftops on remote sensing imagery from satellites, like a CAPTCHA test. But this time, we asked the robots to find all the rooftops. Turns out rooftops worldwide cover a total area of 286,393 square kilometers. That's about the size of the Philippines. That gives you a sense of the available space, but not all rooftops are created equal. So the team divided the globe into multiple clusters in order to consider the challenges tied to each location. This involved factors such as community wealth, the need for solar panel installation training, and the varying levels of sunlight different regions receive. From there, they calculated the amount of energy that could be produced and how much of a drop in carbon emissions would result from switching to solar power. And that's how they got a global surface temperature drop of between 0.05 and 0.13 degrees by 2050. That might not sound like much, But that fraction of a drop could be the tipping point for some coastal communities, whether they survive or not. It could determine the Greenland ice sheet collapsing, or if the boreal permafrost suddenly thaws. Sure, putting solar panels on every roof isn't realistic, but what these scientists wanted to prove is that focusing on areas with strong sunlight or fast-growing cities can make the most of these systems. And there is a viable path forward to avoid a global climate disaster in the coming years, if we choose to take it.
And Darius Madavi is back now with your full BC-wide weather forecast. Darius, I hear it's a pretty special day for you.
Yes, I know most people are celebrating St. Patrick's Day, but for me, today is the Equilux. People are probably more familiar with the Equinox, meaning equal night in Latin, but I want to talk about Equilux, and I'll get into what that is in a second. But first of all, let's talk about why the equinox is coming up later this week, Thursday at 2 a.m., and that's because we're seeing the vernal equinox. This is the moment when the sun's rays are shooting directly perpendicular to the equator. This only happens twice a year, once during the spring equinox and once during the fall equinox. And that means that everywhere in the world roughly gets 12 hours of sunlight. But in order to figure this out, we're basically imagining the sun is a point that these rays are coming from, and so only that center point matters. But in reality, the sun is not a point, which is why on the equinox, Vancouver actually gets closer to 12 hours and 12 minutes of sunlight, not exactly 12 hours. And I'll explain why in a second. But again, the sun is being directly over the equator and shining directly on it, and this only happens twice a year. But the sun is not a point. We are simplifying when we think of the equinox that way. In reality, the top of the sun comes up before the sun's center, so we get a few extra minutes in the morning, and then when the sun is setting, the same thing happens. The center goes down, but we still see the top of the sun for another few minutes. And that's why on the equinox, we actually get a little bit over 12 hours of sunlight all around the world, the whole world. We can all be united in the fact that we get more than 12 hours right before and after the spring and fall equinoxes. So in reality, today is the equilux, the day when we are closest to actually getting 12 hours of light. And that is a bit of nerdery that I thought I'd like to share. Now, let's take a look at our weather across the province because, again, we do have some precipitation on the way. Tomorrow still looks very nice, very clear in many places, but as we get later into the day, some cloud will move in and out, and then overnight, Tuesday into Wednesday, we start to see some of that precipitation arrive for the west coast of the island and then spread further out. Here on the lower mainland, it looks like most of that precipitation will be coming in the overnight hours, both Wednesday and Thursday, and then we have another system rolling in, probably a little bit more intense for Friday. If we zoom out to the rest of the province, you'll see that the ridge of high pressure keeping us dry on the coast, south coast here today and tomorrow is also going to be protecting the interior through the day on Wednesday. It's not until overnight Wednesday into Thursday that we start to see that precipitation actually make it into the insides of the province. Here you go. You can also see here some rain coming again across the board. Most of the interior staying dry, and here on the south coast, other than the parts of the west coast of the island, should be some very manageable precipitation. Here's our here's our conditions across the province. Lots of sunshine, a few showers on the west coast of Vancouver Island, maybe in the South Island. And here's our 5-day forecast. Baneet, overall, looking pretty wet.
All right, Darius, and I also hear that you're going to tell us some good news when it comes to air pollution. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. It is maybe, oh, yes. And before we get into that, let's just take a deep breath. There we go. Now we're all settled. We can talk about some good news about air pollution because it looks like around the world we seem to have hit peak air pollution. And for many major contaminants, that actually happened years or even decades ago. So here, this is nitrogen oxides. These are very bad for human health, and it looks like they peaked back around the year 2000. If we take a look at sulfur dioxide, this is also bad for human health and also causes acid rain. That is also in decline. This is all global data that comes from the Community Emissions Data Initiative. You can see here that we have black carbon, very bad for human health, often results from wildfires. Good way to track wildfire smoke. That is either leveled off or in decline, depending on how big a scale you're looking at. This is carbon monoxide, also in decline for the last few decades. Ammonia is an interesting case because it is not in decline. This is the one major pollutant that is still increasing because it's very important for agriculture. And agriculture is very important globally. But we're finding ways to get around that. And here is volatile organic compounds, also either leveled off or in decline. We can see very similar trends here in Canada, where those things have really dropped off steeply, and in many cases, they have dropped off as quickly as they originally increased, which is very good news. And even in terms of ammonia, here we see a little bit of good news because that has flattened out and gives us some hope for the rest of the world. Maybe it'll be okay.
Maybe it will be okay. All right. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
And still to come, we'll bring you my conversation with 2 Juno-nominated artists about the growing rise of Punjabi music here in BC. Well, Nowruz is just days away. The 2-week-long holiday is filled with food, community, and the sharing of gifts to mark the end of the old and really the beginning of the new.
Our Michelle Gomez has more on how those here in BC are preparing for the Persian New Year.
Live entertainment, local artisans, and traditional Persian treats. Hundreds packing into this community center in Port Coquitlam Sunday ahead of Nowruz.
Vendors that they are bringing some stuff or products that Iranians need for celebrating the Nowruz.
Nowruz marks the beginning of spring and the new year. It's celebrated at the vernal equinox when day and night are equal length.
It's a special day for every Farsi speakers, for Muslim peoples, and I love it.
Go to the party, and we give the present and gift to the kids and maybe adults.
And it's not only about celebrating a new year, but also reflecting on the past year.
I want to start with freshness, with, good spiritual. So it's a start of the new life for me.
An important part of Nowruz is the Hudson table.
Each of the items that you see here, it has a meaning for Iranian.
7 specific items are set out as symbols of health, prosperity, and happiness. And at the center of the celebration, food.
This one is called gas. So the gas is like a gelatin or cafe, and you are tasted on it. It's stretching on your teeth, But the flavor is so good, I believe everybody likes that.
It's one of the famous dish in Iran. It's called Gorme sabzi, and it's a lot of herbs and dried lemon, kidney beans.
Market-goers also being treated to a colorful and comical performance.
This is a very traditional, a person who come to the people and announce them by singing and dancing.
The festivities will continue until Thursday, when Persians will officially ring in the new year.
Happy Nowruz!
Michelle Gomez, CBC News, Port Coquitlam.
Well, momentum is building ahead of the Junos this month.
I sat down with 2 nominees to talk about the growing momentum of Punjabi music in BC.
Punjabi music has always been such a vibe.
Behind the lyrics of these songs, racking up millions of views globally, is Surrey's Janinata.
The world gives me so many ideas, the universe sends ideas. Sometimes it even gets hard to sleep when I'm trying to go to sleep. I get an idea to get up so I don't forget it, voice note it in my phone, go back to sleep.
The Punjabi songwriter has earned his first Juno Award nomination this year in a new category for South Asian music. A milestone, he says, speaks to big dreams, bold collaborations, and the growing momentum of Punjabi music right in his hometown.
And wherever we go, we carry Surrey on our back as well. It just feels like it's like a dream come true.
A dream that took off in his teens.
I'd just come home and burn CDs and download the newest songs illegally, right? And just go through all of that. That's all I did.
Fast forward to 2017, Johnny began making his own music, songs about the Sikh faith and historical struggles.
So that kind of made me feel like I'm kind of giving back to my community.
3 years later, a major pivot. He connected with Punjabi vocalist Inderpal Moga.
And I never met someone before that I was so in sync with.
Moga says he feels like he's living his dream. Moga immigrated to Canada to pursue music. He says he recorded a song and sent it to over 500 artists on Instagram. He says he got one reply, Janinata, and they've been a force since. Working on high-energy songs, love songs. And even adapting hip-hop beats and rap into Punjabi music.
Ever since high school, I know I'd be the man. I was in the hallway rapping.
You were born, you were raised here.
Yeah.
What has it meant for you to do that work here and to elevate Punjabi music?
Surrey is like the backbone of my life. All the studios that we work with, all the people we work with, artwork guys, photographers. In my eyes, it's become such a talented space.
Moga says he's proud that Surrey has given their music the most love. Now, one of their latest hits, Coolin', with Canadian Punjabi icon Jazzy B, is up for a Juno as the South Asian Recording of the Year. It's a full-circle moment for both artists who looked up to Jazzy B growing up.
I want everybody to be like, all right, yo, we're going on the dance floor, we're going to get turned now.
Recognition in Canada is catching up with the music's global popularity, and BC artists are leading the way in this new category at the Juno Awards, happening March 30th in Vancouver. Jenny says it reflects the rising influence of Punjabi music and the talent behind it.
Growing up, again, we didn't have those platforms. We never used to watch the Junos to wait for a Punjabi artist to be on stage. So like to see our own people, our own language on those stages finally, it really means a lot.
Thank you. Baneet Braich, CBC News, Surrey.
Makes me excited for the Junos.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock right after the National. Good night.